Final panel this afternoon, we're joined by the Living Climate Futures Lab. This is a project that received seed funding from MIT HIC through its faculty-driven initiative program. So we have two presenters, Chris Wally and Amma Eru from anthropology. After they present, they'll be joined on the stage with Kate Brown from STS, Janelle Knox-Hayes from Urban Studies and Planning, and Laura Fry-Levine from Anthropology. And they'll be moderated, their conversation, by Evelyn Wang, the MIT Vice President for Energy and Climate. So Chris and Alma, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Wally from, professor and head of anthropology.
Hi, and I'm Amma Eru, research scientist and serving as managing director of the Living Climate Futures Lab.
We just wanted to say thanks so much to the donors who have made MIT HIC possible, and to the Shas Dean's office and the whole MIT HIC crew who've been so fabulous. We're truly honored to be the recipients of the first MIT HIC Faculty-Driven Initiative Award.
So we are a collaborative initiative. There are 20 people, 20 researchers currently involved in the lab. And folks have been coming in and out, but maybe the LCFL members who are here, if you can just wave so we see who you are. Yeah, there you go, okay. Very few of us are here, but hi.
A number of folks are teaching. Yep, and there's Chris.
Great.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to start with a video. It's a short 5-minute video that we made with earlier MIT HIC funding to show the foundations of the lab and tell you a little bit more about how we came about.
When we think about climate change as a scientific problem or a kind of technological problem, we often forget then that climate change is also a social problem, it's a cultural problem, it's a political problem, it's an economic problem.
MIT students come here wanting to change the world and wanting to come up with solutions to impossible problems. When I was a student, what felt like that was missing for me was constantly asking the question, how does this relate to what's happening in the world?
Social scientists can serve as a bridge among different communities of scholars, communities of engineers, as well as native communities, agricultural, urban communities.
What the Living Climate Futures Lab is going to do is listen and to ask questions and to learn the ways in which people are grappling with this in their everyday lives right now.
There are populations that have been grappling with these issues for a long time already and that have developed a lot of knowledge. And this lab is an opportunity to invite that knowledge in, help grow that knowledge in a way that can benefit all of us.
We decided to do this conference a couple years ago, and the idea was, can we bring these community partners that we're working with to MIT and host this space and see what comes out of this conversation?
Ohio has a very certain idea of what farming is, and it's not what we're doing.
These changes take time, and they take effort, and they need true dedication.
Change happens at the speed of trust. And that speed of trust has a lot of different ways to get to it.
We had indigenous leaders from the Pacific Northwest and from North Carolina. We had environmental justice groups from Chicago and from Boston. We had urban farmers from Ohio and from the New England area.
When I deal with communities that are on the front line of an environmental stress, they often feel alone. And so when we brought people together, I think that really gave people a boost. It told them that there's all kinds of other people and resources out there to help them.
When you look at indigenous lands that indigenous peoples have stewarded, we see much greater biodiversity. It hits on a lot of what indigenous peoples' knowledges have said for millennia. It's about relationships. It's understanding how the world works in an interconnected way.
Working with communities, it is really important to build long-term relationships and not create extractive forms of relationships.
Professor Mike Short with Professor Munkbat has this molten salt heat bank that has been produced in the lab, but we need to make it work in people's homes in Mongolia. So anthropology steps in. The intention is to learn about how Mongolians use technology and what could work in a particular setting.
We had the opportunity to work with students at the National University in Mongolia, and it was honestly like one of the greatest experiences of my life.
We debriefed almost every night about what has been discovered, what is the engineering side and what is the ethnographic side, to the point where students gained this fluency to merge two disciplines together in such a smart, culturally sensitive way.
So much of the MIT education is, this is the way the world is. It's very black and white. It's so common to say, well, I see a problem. I can come up with a series of technical solutions that if everyone behaves like I think they will, then it's going to work. And yet when students get out into the real world, they realize nothing does. It takes cultivating relationships. That's what our students have learned too.
I learned so much more about the project and about what the future of this project could look like than I think if we had just gone alone.
The discourses of urgency, crisis, speed, and scale in the context of solutions just keeps coming up.
Who are those partners and communities that we want to engage, and what should be included in this conversation?
Why aren't we training students to work with communities? Why aren't we training them to understand different ways of knowing? It's a really good example of something that we should be doing across the board.
The Living Climate Futures Lab is a unique opportunity for MIT to stand as a leader in the response to climate change. It's extremely meaningful for a school that is known for STEM to say, hey, the social and the cultural are as important as the technological and the scientific.
Maybe we could leave it on the picture of everybody until the poll comes up. Oops. Nope. There we go. Great, thank you. So as mentioned in the video, we're committed to thinking about climate change in the more holistic terms of how it plays out in everyday life, and by partnering with community environmental organizations who are themselves living through the effects of climate change and developing their own solutions for how to mitigate those effects. We recognize that in order to do this effectively, we need to bring together different forms of knowledge and partner with those in other fields, including STEM. So this lab came about because many of us as researchers have for many years been working already at the community level, not only in the US, but internationally. And we've seen how well-intentioned policies and programs by international organizations, national agencies, and other institutions too often fail or leave behind a trail of unintended consequences. There are many reasons for this, but the lack of familiarity with particular locations or populations, or lack of substantive or equitable partnerships are some of the key factors. As a consequence, many of us have experienced firsthand as researchers the often enormous disconnect between what such interventions are assumed to do in the abstract and the reality of how such interventions play out or fail to play out in everyday life. So our intent is to think about how to achieve what is often referenced as scale and impact differently. So first, our focus is on building long-term research partnerships and connections with community organizations as a basis for building trust, as was referenced in the video. So we're operating with different kinds of timeframes than are commonly used, for example, in developing technologies for markets or generating venture capital, where the assumption is that showing immediate returns is a key sign of success. Taking time is part of our secret sauce. In the model we're developing for the Living Climate Futures Lab, we seek to generate impact not by replicating what works in one location and transferring that to other locations. Our goal is to generate conversations among those living in very different places that help push forward thinking about what works without presuming those solutions will look similar across different locales. So for all of us, what we seek to scale up is the process of learning how to listen across different groups and to explore place-based solutions through collective conversation, and by generating what STS scholars call a community of practice. We envision the community groups that we partner with as similar to a series of sensors spread out across national and global landscapes that can tap into and offer a reading of what is happening in different locations. To make this work, we need to partner across disciplines and schools within universities. We also have to learn to partner with community organizations in ways that are co-designed and fully collaborative, and that our community partners themselves consider to be ethical and equitable. For example, while marketable technologies to address climate change are absolutely critical, our own path takes a different orientation to arrive at similar goals. The emphasis for the Living Climate Futures Lab is on scaling knowledge and showing impact by extending out horizontally to create a more vibrant and equitable research commons in often overlooked locations.
And so to this end, the lab's work is articulated along two axes. So the first one is for the lab to serve as a research hub, where members can form a community of practice, as Chris was mentioning, across SHAS and STEM disciplines, where they can learn from one another, develop new collaborations. And you'll be hearing more about some of the research that's happening during the panel after this short overview. But here we just have two examples from the anthropology department. Professor Amy Moran-Thomas, who's working on co-creating sensors in old coal mining regions of Pennsylvania that are being heavily impacted environmentally and health-wise by natural gas extraction. And Professor Sonia Adelaide, who is graciously allowing us to learn from the network she's been developing, the Center for Braiding Indigenous Knowledges and Science. And we're learning how to do just that, how to bring these different knowledge systems into conversation. In addition to a research hub, we're also generating a suite of experiential learning classes to train the next generation in how to work across disciplines and how to collaborate ethically with community partners. And those of you who've been here all day have heard again and again this emphasis on returning to or enhancing the MIT mens in manus and teaching students by doing. And so we wanted to illustrate that. It's late, you've been here all day, so we're showing videos because it's easier to integrate. And so we have another short video from one of the classes, Lab to Land, and we're creating a series of these 1.5-minute, 2-minute videos to make our approach more legible to students, but then also to colleagues across SHAS and STEM fields and community partners. And so
Brianna Meyer and I wanted to create a class where students have the possibility to engage with communities that have actually come up with solutions to climate problems. We piloted our field school this summer. We took 2 students out to the Pacific Northwest to engage with the actual cultural landscapes. One of our community partners, Cecilia, are an Indigenous-led environmental nonprofit that has been dedicated to teaching people about ancestral Indigenous knowledges.
Cecilia focuses on land, water, and human rights, and in particular protecting the Salish Sea. Our legend goes, our first mother came from the water. What does a mother do? A mother feeds you. So we start working with it. That's the beginning of our law. The communities that we work with follow that same law and want to give back to the things that provide for us.
It was really grounding, just meeting a lot of people doing really good things, doing good work, who just have such a community-based value.
There is a tendency that the people that you're learning about, you kind of learn to see them as these symbols versus actual people. Living with them, you get the chance to actually meet them as people and for them to meet you as people as well and to actually form a connection.
One of the key concepts in the class that we're engaging with is the concept of infrastructure and the notion that infrastructures don't only build physical and material worlds, but also build social worlds.
The best work that we've been doing is in our own backyard, and we continue to do that, to be stewards of our land. We always been that way, and we are now, and we always will be. That's who we are as Tsleil-Waututh. Anybody can make a difference, and that's the same MIT. Whatever you're doing in school, let's create to enhance with technology to make the world a better place.
This is something I wrote in my field notes. As a mechanical engineering student, I've been searching for solutions, trying to problem solve a way out of the hole we seem to just keep digging. But this trip helped me organize my thoughts. There's no engineering without people, no people without community, no communities without the planet, and no planet without balance.
So you see, we have a whole series of courses that are coming, and these videos will be up on our website. The next one that's coming up, and that's just about done, is for a class called Green Steel, Green Jobs, which is a course that explores developing collaborations across anthropology and engineering to simultaneously work on decarbonization while also trying to design for good jobs. And with that, we will transition to the panel where you'll get to hear a bit more about some of the research underway in the lab.
Great. Thank you.
sit in this order.
We'll mix it up.
We'll mix it up.
Keep
Make
everybody
it a little more
confused.
confusing. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I know we're the last panel, but hope you'll find this extremely exciting. I think certainly from the videos that we saw, I think the Living Climate Futures Lab is such an inspiration. And as I'm leading the climate project, I see so many synergies and opportunities to really collectively work together, which I really enjoy just hearing about, really the opportunities for partnerships at MIT, and I think the more we can engage, the more we can actually affect and impact people in communities. So, but maybe we'll start just with a round of introductions and maybe sharing a little bit about what each of you are working on in the context of the Living Climate Futures Lab. And I know Professor Chris Wally has already shared a little bit, but maybe I'll ask you to start.
Sure, just super quickly in the interest of time. So Amma had mentioned the class Green Steel, Green Jobs, my work for many years. I did earlier research on environmental issues in East Africa, but later after that, I've been working in the area where I grew up, Southeast Chicago, an old steel mill neighborhood. My father was a steel worker. My grandfather was a steel worker. And so this class Green Steel, Green Jobs that's partnering with Elsa Olivetti and the Climate Project and others is really, again, as Amma mentioned, trying to think about this question, can we decarbonize? At the same time, we don't just automate away jobs. How do we actually try to create good jobs for people? And so that's a lot of the focus I'm bringing to this.
Hi, my name is Laura Fry-Levine. I am a research scientist in anthropology. My PhD is in sociology, and I study sociology of science and sociology of collaboration. So I have a connectivity grant from MIT HIC to pilot integrated research hub in Shas for conversations and research engagement to integrate across social science and humanistic disciplines, but also as well to build community and build research infrastructure to solve climate problems by bringing in engineers and scientists to figure out how to integrate research.
Hi, everyone. My name is Janelle Knox-Hayes. I'm a professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and I direct the Resilient Communities Lab. And so a lot of my research projects are about bringing a community focus into both thoughts of climate mitigation, adaptation, and then also thinking about energy systems and transition and how to bring a socio-technical lens into technology development. One of the things I wanted to highlight is our Indigenous Environmental Planning class. So we've been building for the past 5 years an Indigenous Community Planning program within DUSP, and this has probably been one of our most successful efforts. We now have 3 classes. We've partnered with the anthropology department to bring incredible scholars like Leslie Jonas, who's a Mashpee Wampanoag Eel Clan elder, in to co-teach these courses with us. And Indigenous Environmental Planning is an amazing course in that we bring together multidisciplinary students and then pair them with client projects. And so we've worked over the last 5 years with more than 20 communities around the United States. And the student teams have an amazing opportunity to learn firsthand from these Indigenous communities to think about their life ways, their knowledge systems, and how to bring that into a focus in different facets of urban planning. So we've had really successful projects with the nation of Hawaii, for example, exploring their Ahupua'a system, which is sort of reimagining or rethinking planning from the standpoint of from the mountain to the sea. So the way in which aquifers and watersheds guide different thoughts about economic transition and economic integration. And then working with the Shinnecock Indian Nation, we've done a number of projects over the years, including redesigning energy systems and thinking about different forms of land use planning where students have actually gone in and done participatory action mapping with tribal elders to think about not just the physical resources on site, but the cultural heritage sites and how to preserve and integrate those. So that's been probably a really successful example of how to take what we're trying to do with the Living Climate Futures Lab, partner with the students, partner with the communities, and bring of those different knowledge systems together.
Hi, I'm Kate Brown. I'm an environmental historian in science, technology, and society. And I came to MIT as a historian working in nuclear disaster zones. And at one point, I realized, and I saw thousands of people going into the radioactive pre-pit marshes around the zone, picking blueberries on an industrial scale. First I thought, oh, what a shame to send these radioactive blueberries into global markets to end up on your breakfast table. But then I also started to think, these blueberries are doing what an army of scientists and engineers and Soviet soldiers could not do. They're cleaning up the environment and handing radioactive waste to humans in a neat little blue package. And so I started, I tried to advocate that we pay these pickers and dispose of the blueberries, the mushrooms, and cranberries as radioactive waste. But that got me thinking about how plants can be our allies in ways that offer low carbon, low tech solutions to the problems that we have in the Anthropocene today. And so then I got interested in big cities and the history of big cities and self-provisioning, and how as farmers exhausted soils in the countryside, they were impoverished, they moved into cities starting in the 1850s or so, and when they got there, they saw all the nutrients they had been growing and stripping, mining from their fields, were all sitting around as garbage. And they're like, don't throw that out, I'll take it. And they started building these human-engineered soils that are the most productive agriculture in human history. And so I'm just finishing a book about that. It's coming out in February. And that got me into teaching. And I was like, oh, there's so much more to explore about this. So in January, I'm going to teach a course in Spain, an IAP course. We're going to take about 15 students over to look at regenerative agriculture, which then leads to regenerative economies in the Catalonia area. And then in the spring semester, I'm teaching the second part of a MITHIC-funded course called Urban Resilience, with an instructor from architecture and another one from art and agriculture, ACT. And together we're going to work with 2 urban farms who've asked us for help. And what the students are going to do is design and build capital coops, chicken coops in the shape of the US Capitol. And on them will be history exhibits of the food sovereignty movements, especially in East and South Boston, that have been really powerful since the 1970s.
Great. Well, thank you for those great introductions. Maybe, Chris, I'll start off with you. I certainly appreciate the lab's focus on the impact of climate change on people's everyday lives. And at the MIT Climate Project, we're very much thinking also about the scale of communities, because we think that is the unit of change that will really help us really think about this holistic global challenge. But the one question we're always grappling with, what is really a community? Right? And what exactly is a scale? It could be a small town, say at the coast of Cambodia. It could be a very large city like Chicago. So how do you think about that in terms of the diversity of contexts in your approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in anthropology, actually, when we use communities, we often use it in quotes. And actually, in my first book, I had a whole chapter on taking apart the concept of community. But it can be a helpful one as well. I mean, communities, as we know, right? They're heterogeneous. People move around. They're diverse, right? You can't bound something easily as a community. But nonetheless, climate change effects play out in people's everyday lives, right? And so, what are the place-based ways in which these things play out? Who are the leaders who are already there? What are the community groups already at work? How can we bring those in to partner with in ways that they're also translating for others in the places where they are? And so hopefully the focus we're bringing is both the kind of power of working at this level, but at the same time recognizing that kind of diversity and heterogeneity, and how that's also a source for thinking more creatively about these kinds of questions. So I don't know if other folks, there's plenty in the room also who work on, kind of at this level of work, if others have thoughts on that, but anyway.
Any others? You want to comment on that?
Just speaking as a sociologist of science working at this intersection of collaborative, large-scale efforts that involve multiple kinds of expertise, I think it's very common, and there's a big literature on this in social science, for social scientists and humanists to be called upon at the end of pipe to implement a prefigured technology or research agenda in a community. And we know that there are counterintuitive effects of these technologies that reverberate when they're not designed in tandem with the people who are the intended users and with the relationships that those technologies can configure. So we're really excited to partner at the outset of some research design in terms of our collaboration within MIT to build MIT's climate-wide MIT-wide climate paradigm of research.
And I think one of the definitions in addition to community is frontline communities. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about people who feel like threatened by climate change or other problems, environmental problems. And so a lot of these communities start in a living room where people get together because they're upset about something, they're worried about something. And then from there, so they tend to be self-appointed communities. And in our ethics, we want them to come to us to ask for help. We're trying not to be the parachuting social scientists that go in and extract knowledge, but we're there to exchange.
And I think that's a good point. I think thinking about frontline communities, certainly there's still a lot of diversity of that, and there's so many that you could try to work with and to help solve their problems. How do you pick where to start? And we've heard a lot of examples of this, but there's so many, and how do you think about approaching it? How do you pick, right, the ones that you decide to work with in that context?
I mean, I would just say in my case, that was kind of the other way around. I mean, because I grew up in this old steel mill community that was heavily polluted, I actually became an anthropologist to try to make sense of why the experience I had where I was growing up. I went, after all the steel mills closed and my dad was out of work for a long time, I went off to a fancy boarding school. And becoming an anthropologist was a way to kind of try to understand my own background, and the relationships with the community groups I work with actually began before I was an anthropologist. So I didn't choose the place. I chose MIT as a way to continue that relationship there. So that's somewhat different than a lot of folks, but that was kind of the route in.
Any other comments? Janelle, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what you're hitting at, Evelyn, is that you don't have to have interaction at a really large scale to have meaningful impact. And I think that's where communities can be so important. Like so many of our climate mitigation or adaptation efforts tend to take this state top-down forcing approach that we need wide-scale energy transition. And we absolutely do need all of that. But I think that as academics and serving in a kind of bridge capacity between the science, the technology, and the community values and needs and objectives, we can have a really meaningful role working with those communities to which we already have connections, or working where, locally we're at a smaller scale. That kind of work can be really impactful and meaningful as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's absolutely true, and I think that's how we're also very much thinking about it. But I think the questions that continue to be kind of front and center is like, well, since it's such a large problem, in Chris's, your case, it's it's been part of you in some ways. But as engineers, we're trying to really take advantage of our skills, but also being respectful of what communities also want, and how do we really engage effectively. And I think that speaks to, Laura, your point as well, because I think there's a lot of well-meaning. However, sometimes the well-meaning doesn't translate into how communities kind of really interpret kind of that well-meaning. And I think that's always this ongoing challenge and opportunity for us to learn from many of you that really look at these aspects in detail.
Absolutely.
And I just might throw out that one orientation of the lab overall is, again, really the focus on the long term, so that it's not kind of one-off relationships like, oh, we're going to work with this community this semester, and next semester we're going to do something else. This is our long term, and the partnerships for many of us were, even mine is an unusually long relationship, but in many instances, people were already working with particular groups. So the idea is like, we are in it for the long haul with the groups that we're partnering with, and the idea is to keep going back to those groups and make sure that it's long term. So I think that's one of the ways, a different kind of time frame is something it's key to building relations of trust, as you heard one of the folks say in the video that you saw.
Yeah. Kate, I'll turn to you in terms of, you just mentioned, a few classes that you're teaching. You talked about this urban resilience that you're teaming up with architecture to teach, and you also teach a class, you've taught a class with Susan Solomon on 20th century environmental programs. And you shared a little bit, but I'm curious, what can we learn from these efforts that would specifically guide how we work today across areas of MIT generally?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. These are challenging relationships, I think, across social science and science and engineering, because we don't always immediately speak the same language. And we don't always have a level of trust. And so I think what's been so great, I've taught a course with Susan Solomon in EAPS now for the last 4 or 5 years, and now with architecture and art, is that by working together, and we have what the goal in mind is students and their learning, and working together we develop both a common vocabulary and a sense of trust. And then from there, we start to do other things. So Susan Solomon and I write op-eds together, and we get involved in this, and so on and so forth. So I think that's one of the real values we have, and thanks to Mythic for allowing us to be able to, in the social sciences, to start to ask the questions and to set, the first parameters and invite others to come in. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And Janelle, I have a question for you. You mentioned in your introductory remarks that you spent a lot of time with indigenous communities, and you talked about the opportunities, but where do you see there are still challenges and gaps by which how we really can effectively engage with them, that we can help them and work with them effectively?
Yeah, I think, the last few months have been really challenging with all of the federal impacts, different regulatory pressures. And so I think capacity is a huge issue that is, as academic institutions, it's really important that our engagements are not extractive, that we're actually going in and that there's a mutual exchange or mutual facilitation of benefit in these exchanges. And so funding is a huge issue, like trying to find, like when we were running the Indigenous Environmental Planning practicum course, we provide honoraria to the communities to work with our students, and that's really important. It's acknowledging the time and the effort that they're putting into the projects and what they're bringing to the table. And so I think that kind of level of support can't be taken for granted. We kind of seen in the last few months where we have a more difficult budgetary situation, how that can make that kind of work challenging. And then it's also just a capacity issue. The often indigenous nations, you're looking at smaller groups of people that are fulfilling all of the functions of a government. So any kind of engagement with us is an extra level of engagement. And sometimes the ministers or secretaries that we're working with in these governments already have multiple jobs. And so it's kind of that recognition that any kind of academic engagement can take time and resources away from them as well. And so I think, it's sort of to Chris's point, it's important that the relationships be meaningful to both sides. Like they're absolutely invaluable to our students, but that we have sustained funding and resources to support these programs where we want to build them, and that they're also long-term. I think some of our most successful projects, like with Shinnecock Indian Nation, we've done multiple projects over and over again, and they develop really meaningful relationships with our students. Our students have an appreciation for the communities they're working with, and then the projects themselves can actually take work that's somewhat restricted by being in one semester context and expand it over time so that they can do actually really deep and meaningful work for these or with these communities.
Well, thank you for that. Laura, I'm very excited about about Mythic in general and the opportunities for cross-pollination with what we're trying to achieve with the climate project. You spoke to this a little bit in your introductory remarks as well. And research really has included an examination of the challenges faced, by these interdisciplinary teams in seeking these collaborative approaches to developing these climate solutions. And I was wondering if you could dig in a little bit more, because I think this is really the crux of it all as we're trying to think about how do we really engage across the ecosystem to really move the needle in some of these solutions and impacting and helping communities.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that is the most exciting and potentially generative challenge when we crack that as an MIT hard problem. My colleagues have spoken to some of the collaborative environments that they've been involved in terms of collaborating internally to MIT, and I'm hearing a lot of emphasis on trust building and capacity building and working together to identify some shared language, and these are all excellent tools for us in terms of individual collaborations. And I also want to point out some what's under the hood a little bit in these challenges. So we are often presumed in social science and humanities to have different objects of study, and that can be true, but as we've heard from all these wonderful videos, we have a lot of shared interests in terms of how to address climate as an object of study. So we may study people in communities, but folks in engineering study efficiency and mechanical processes and technical innovation and all these things that are exciting and at the forefront of climate work. But there really is a gap in research investment in terms of social science of climate change. So only less than 0.25% of research funding goes to the social science of climate mitigation. So that's a really exciting opportunity for us. And integrating across these areas of expertise is quite difficult. We need to learn how to get comfortable with indeterminacy, with speaking in different paradigms, and with having different kinds of empirical toolkits. I think our empirical toolkits are often not legible to one another. And we also really need to figure out how to think differently. And thinking in terms of impact differently. I think we've heard a little bit of, I'd love to continue this conversation because impact is it's a watchword and it's so motivating. And I'm gonna oversimplify engineering a little bit, I realize, but when engineers think about impact, they're thinking about optimizing within a particular technology or a particular technical process, and optimizing within the boundaries of a specific condition. But as we know from a lot of research in engineering as well as in social sciences, when you expand that area of analysis, impacts in one area have counterintuitive effects at larger scales, at longer scales, not just in other technical arenas, but also for social relationships, for communities, for receiving communities of pollution and things like this. So I think this is a really powerful opportunity we have to, at MIT, situate technical innovation within its socio-technical context. And so I'm really excited to be involved in that.
And I think the theme here is a lot of learnings across disciplines for us to really be able to really appreciate all these different nuances and opportunities. I'm starting to realize I'm out of time, so I'm sorry.
Please, Kurt.
Thanks. Laura, you actually started to get into this a little bit in your last response. I'm curious, while across all of these great projects you're investing in the heterogeneous nature of each community, what kinds of interesting entanglements, especially beneficial or particularly interesting ones, might be coming up because you're gathering all of these projects together under the Living Climate Futures umbrella?
Yeah, and if there's folks, where did Alma go? I might have thoughts on this. Just to throw something, if nothing comes to mind quickly for somebody else, I was just thinking we actually did a symposium. This is actually where the idea for this lab came from, was a symposium we had back in 2022. And it brought together different environmental justice groups, different urban farmers, indigenous groups from different parts of the country, and they all got together. And there was one moment where there were these young teenagers of color from a high school in Southeast Chicago who were dealing with all these kinds of toxicity issues. And they got into conversation in the audience with some of the leaders of the Illumination from the Pacific Northwest. And one of the leaders of the Illumination, Jay Julius, said to the student, I dreamed you, and had all this amazing, and those teenagers were just like, oh my God, they were just so amazed by this kind of connection across groups. And so there was conversations that were happening across different kinds of groups, very different kinds of groups in different parts of the country that like kind of sparked whole other kinds of relationships. Some of those folks are still in conversation with each other. Just a kind of generativity of bringing this different stuff together. And so there's something, in some ways, that symposium, we kind of thought of it as a happening. Like you bring these people together, you know, and it was about putting them into conversation and kind of seeing what comes out of that. And that was just really super exciting. I don't know if others in the group in the room have kind of thoughts on this, but anyway.
Question?
I have a question that goes crossing between the Living Climate Futures and the Climate Project, because it seems as though impact might mean something very different between the two projects. And would anyone does anyone perceive that and want to comment on it?
I'll start if it's okay. I actually think I think they're the same ultimately at the end of the day. And you know, the Climate Project is very much focused on building well-being, and that means both human well-being and planetary health. And I think that impacts on communities and how we want to think about, you know, how do we build, you know, empower communities so that they can have these lives that are sustainable, you know, resilient and prosperous. I think it's synergistic. And so it's not just about, say, CO2 abated from, you know, that's a very technological perspective. It's also about jobs. It's about job creation. It's about bolstering local economies. It's about, there's a lot of this, I think, that is, you know, hopefully resonant. Welcome your thoughts from this team.
Mm-hmm. I think this is such an important conversation for us to continue to have. I think when we crack that MIT hard problem of impact that is locally situated and desirable, and climate solutions that are not just durable in the long term in terms of planetary health, but also welcomed and integrated into the prosperity of local communities, and being invited into that process, like we will generate some really cool solutions.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a flashing red light here, which makes me think that we're out of time. Let's thank our panel one more time. You can stay other way. That's the end of our programming for today. I just want to thank one more time all of our presenters and all of our moderators for the wonderful panels today. If you're so to produce an event like this requires a lot of help from a lot of different people, and because we are a human-centered entity, I'm going to name them all. So I'd like to thank a lot of people who have helped out either today volunteering or else in the lead up to today in terms of the planning. So a big thanks to Tia Gurlio, Michael Brindley, Liam McDonald, Megan Hinckley, Anne-Marie Michael, Hanley Valentine, Jennifer Guarino, Maeve Downey, MF Gittes, Jana Green, Carly Saul, Benjamin Daniel, Chan Fan, Britta Bell, Rosie DiCostanzo, Liz Kazakov, and then the lovely people from MIT AV and Video Productions. Thank you to all of these. And the biggest thank you goes to our MIT team. This is Jen Alton. I think you want to take up. Wow, and Elena Nasiglia. I mean, we're very fortunate to have Institute support for MITHIC and such amazing faculty producing this work, but we're also very fortunate to have a team like Jen and Elena supporting everything we're doing. I have some closing words, but I'm not going to say them. I think instead, we're going to go down to the 6th floor and have a reception, because I think community building is a large part of MITHIC. So let's go talk and build community. Thanks, everyone.